Over the past day, the armed forces of Ukraine repelled 102 Russian attacks and hit clusters of military personnel, an air defense system and a command post. Source: General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on Facebook. Quote, "Despite significant losses, the enemy continues offensive actions on the Lyman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Marinka and Shakhtarsk fronts." Over the past day, the defense forces repelled 102 enemy attacks in these areas. Over the past day, the Russians launched 3 missile attacks, including on a civilian infrastructure facility in Sloviansk, Donetsk Oblast. They also carried out 8 airstrikes and fired 49 times from multiple launch rocket systems, MLRS. Russian invaders continue looting in the temporarily occupied territories. Recently, in Enerhodar, the occupiers began to take away training equipment from the training center of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, used for staff training. Over the day, the Ukrainian Air Force delivered a strike at Russia's anti-aircraft missile system, as well as 6 strikes at clusters of occupiers' personnel and military equipment. Units from rocket forces and artillery struck a command post, 2 clusters of Russian personnel and military equipment, as well as 2 ammunition dumps and a fuel and lubricant storage point. Ukrainian troops have been repelling numerous Russian attempts to capture the town of Bakhmut, a top commander has said. Wagner tried to break through from several directions. The situation around Bakhmut remains difficult, the commander of Ukrainian ground forces Colonel General Alexander Syrsky said this morning. All enemy attempts to capture the town are repelled by artillery, tanks, and other firepower. He added that pro-Russian Wagner Group forces are attacking from several directions, trying to break through the defenses of our troops and advance to the central districts of the town. Sky News is unable to independently verify this battlefield report. As we mentioned a little earlier, both sides have been mounting heavy losses around the eastern town. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed last night that some 1,100 Russian soldiers had been killed in the area since March 6. The conflict between Russian Ministry of Defense and Wagner Group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin has likely reached a climax as thousands of fighters have died fighting in Bakhmut. According to the Institute for Study of War, ASW, analysis, the Russian Ministry of Defense, MOD, is currently prioritizing eliminating Wagner on the battlefields in Bakhmut, which it concludes is slowing its advance in the area. It said the conflict began when Prigozhin ran a relentless defamation campaign against senior figures in the Russian military, including Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chief of the Russian General Staff Valery Gerasimov. Now that the group has failed to show progress, it is believed Russian MOD officials are seizing the opportunity to deliberately expend both elite and convict Wagner forces in Bakhmut in an effort to weaken Prigozhin and derail his ambitions for greater influence in the Kremlin. The ISW believes Russian President Vladimir Putin likely became alarmed by Prigozhin's political ambitions in October last year. Putin likely stopped the Russian MOD from directly attacking Prigozhin but instead created conditions in which the Russian military leadership could reassume more authority. Such conditions likely threatened Prigozhin, who began to intensify his criticism of the Russian MOD and further deepened the conflict between Wagner forces and military leadership. Ukraine has stepped up efforts to recruit women with a background in chemistry and biology to serve in the army. Retired Lieutenant Colonel of the Lugansk People's Republic's (LPR) People's Militia Andrei Marachko told TASS on Monday. Ukrainian military conscription offices have stepped up the recruitment of women to serve in the Special Military Operations Zone. Apart from usual military specialties, there is increased demand for those with a civilian education in chemistry, biology, biotechnology and veterinary medicine, he noted, citing Russian intelligence. The preferred age is between 22 and 45, Marachko added. According to him, women who sign contracts are promptly taken into military service and granted military specialties. For months, the Ukrainian media have been reporting about employees at territorial recruitment and social support centers handing out conscription letters to men on the street, often with the use of force. Russia's Federal Security Service, FSB, has detained a Russian citizen who acted in the interests of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry's main intelligence directorate. He was trying to talk mobilized men into handing over information about the locations of Russian military units, steal military equipment and voluntarily surrender in captivity, the press service of the regional FSB branch told TASS on Monday. The illegal activities of a Russian citizen were suppressed. He sought to induce persons drafted into the ranks of the Russian armed forces as part of partial mobilization to commit high treason by providing the enemy with information about the locations of Russian troop units and formations, to steal and transfer military equipment and voluntarily surrender to captivity, the press service noted. The FSB explained that criminal proceedings were launched on grounds of cooperation on a confidential basis with a foreign state, international or foreign organization. At the request of the investigation, the court detained the suspect for 2 months. At present, investigative actions and operational and search activities aimed at clarification of all the circumstances of the crime are being carried out. Over the last year, the U.S. has provided critical support to the country, with President Joe Biden vowing to show his nation's unwavering support for the war-torn country. But now there appear to be growing differences behind the scenes between Washington and Kyiv on war aims, Politico reports, citing sources in the White House administration. The news outlet said based on conversations with 10 officials, lawmakers, and experts, both nations were trying to maintain unity but fractures were appearing. It also reported multiple administration officials had begun worrying that Ukraine is expending so much manpower and ammunition in Bakhmut, which remains the focal point of the war. There have been moments of frustration about Washington's delivery of weapons to Ukraine, and though most in the administration have been understanding about Kyiv's defense aims, there have been grumblings about the constant weapons requests, White House officials told the news outlet. Speaking on the crisis, Michael McCaul, chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, said, "The administration doesn't have a clear policy objective and a clear goal. Is it to drag this thing out, which is precisely what Vladimir Putin wants? Is it to just give them enough to survive and not to win? I don't see a policy for victory right now, and if we don't have that, then what are we doing?" With the war in its second year, the U.S. remains in lockstep with Ukraine, but whispers have begun about how tenable this relationship will be as the war continues, the news outlet adds. The South Korean National Defense Ministry has not changed its position on direct supplies of its weapons to Ukraine, the ministry told TASS on Monday. The ministry's policy on this issue has not changed, the ministry said in reply to a TASS request to comment on the decision of the Defense Acquisition Program Administration, DAPA, to allow the delivery of Polish Crab howitzers with South Korean components to Ukraine. Seoul refuses to transfer lethal weapons directly to Ukraine. Reuters reported last week, citing a senior official, that in 2022, the South Korean National Defense Procurement Administration approved Warsaw's delivery of Polish Crab howitzers with South Korean chassis to Ukraine. European states increased their imports of major weaponry by 47% in the 5 years to 2022, while the United States' share of global arms exports rose to 40% from 33%, a leading conflict think tank said on Monday. Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year, following years of growing tensions, has prompted European countries to rush to bolster their defenses. Even as arms transfers have declined globally, those to Europe have risen sharply due to the tensions between Russia and most other European states, Peter D. Wiesman, senior researcher with the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, said in a statement. SIPRI defines major arms as aircraft, warships, tanks, artillery, missiles and various heavy defense systems. European states in the U.S. led NATO alliance increased their arms imports by 65% from the previous 5-year period. But worldwide, international arms transfers fell 5.1%, according to SIPRI. The United States and Russia have been the world's largest and second largest arms exporters for the past 3 decades. U.S. arms exports increased by 14% from 2013 to 17, and the U.S. counted for 40% of global arms exports. Russia's share fell to 16% from 22%. It is likely that the invasion of Ukraine will further limit Russia's arms exports, SIPRI's Seaman T. Wiesman said. This is because Russia will prioritize supplying its armed forces and demand from other states will remain low due to trade sanctions on Russia. In 2022, SIPRI warned that the global nuclear arsenal was likely to grow in the coming years. Chinese President Xi Jinping is planning to travel to Russia to meet Vladimir Putin as soon as next week, according to Reuters. People familiar with the matter have said the two leaders will meet in Moscow but did not provide more details. China's foreign ministry have not confirmed the meeting. In January, Russia's TASS news agency reported that Mr. Putin had invited President Xi to visit the country in the spring. Then, The Wall Street Journal reported last month that a visit to Moscow could take place in April or early May. The plans for a visit come after China offered to broker peace in Ukraine and unveiled a 12-point peace plan. But the proposal was branded an attempt at public relations by China, which 1 year ago said it has a no-limits friendship with Russia. China has yet to condemn its ally or describe the war as an invasion, and has also criticized Western sanctions imposed on Moscow. North Korea has decided to take important, practical measures for the offensive use of war deterrence, state media said Sunday, with the United States and South Korea set to launch their joint military exercise this week. The decision was made at an enlarged meeting of the Central Military Commission of the ruling Workers' Party of Korea, WPK, presided over by leader Kim Jong-un, according to the official Korean Central News Agency, KCNA. The meeting discussed and adopted the important practical steps for making more effective, powerful and offensive use of the war deterrent of the country in coping with the present situation in which the war provocations of the U.S. and South Korea are reaching the red line, the KCNA said in an English-language dispatch. It did not specify what the practical measures would be. Kim inspected a fire assault drill, simulating its attack on the enemy's airfield last week in a bid to check the actual war readiness posture of its military. His younger sister Kim Yo-jong earlier warned her country is ready to take overwhelming actions against military activities by the U.S. and the South. South Korea and the United States on Monday kicked off their longest-running, large-scale military exercises redesigned to strengthen defense and response capabilities against escalating threats from North Korea. In response, Pyongyang disclosed its first-ever underwater cruise missile launches on Sunday, raising the curtain on military actions which it had repeatedly warned. Amid North Korea's accelerating military buildup, the Freedom Shield exercise continues for 11 days without a weekend break to enable South Korea and U.S. troops to enhance their combat readiness and combine defense posture under real war conditions. Freedom Shield presents real-world scenarios in light of ever-changing security environments including North Korea's advanced missile and nuclear capabilities, as well as lessons from the war in Ukraine, according to South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff. The combined military exercises are staged based on the South Korea-US operation plans in order to defend South Korea from the invasion of North Korea, and therefore the exercises are defensive in nature, said the JCS. JCS spokesperson Colonel Lee Sung-jun said the South Korea-US alliance will stage the Freedom Shield exercise without a hitch even though North Korea seeks to interrupt military exercises by conducting provocations such as missile launches. The Freedom Shield exercise covers every stage of war on the Korean peninsula, including crisis management, transition to war and defending the peninsula from North Korean attacks. South Korean and U.S. troops also practice conducting counteroffensive operations and stabilizing the North Korean situation. Seoul and Washington have also brought back theater-level field training exercises after a 5-year hiatus. The Allies have agreed to stage around 20 field training exercises or FTXs, including amphibious landing drills, in connection with the Freedom Shield exercise. North Korea has threatened to take tit-for-tat actions against annual springtime military exercises between the Allies. A Kyodo News poll showed Monday that 57% of respondents in Japan support South Korea's solution to a wartime labor row between the two countries, announced last week. Last week, South Korea unveiled its plan to settle a compensation dispute for wartime labor victims. Accordingly, a Korean government-backed organization will compensate the victims, rather than the Japanese companies that have been sued. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida praised the proposal, saying South Korea's decision would help restore ties between Tokyo and Seoul. Kishida has hailed the proposal, saying South Korea's decision will help restore healthy relations between Tokyo and Seoul, while 33% of the respondents did not appreciate the move, the survey showed. Move on to other notable news around the world. On March 12, China's foreign ministry warned the Philippines against tightening military cooperation with the U.S. China believes that the U.S. actions are in the service of its geopolitical strategy and detrimental to Manila's security policy. The Chinese embassy in the Philippines issued this warning on Sunday, in the context of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s decision to allow the U.S. military to add 4 more military bases in the Philippines. This cooperation will push the Philippines into confrontation with China and enter the geopolitical race. The security and peace of the Philippines will be in jeopardy. The Chinese embassy also urged the Manila government to stay away from U.S. global leadership efforts. China has accused the U.S. and NATO of behaving like it was during the Cold War. The embassy added, "Now, China and the Philippines are countries in the Asia region that are recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. We should make the right decision to maintain good neighborly relations and achieve mutual benefits." UK should level up its investment in green technologies to match the US and the EU, according to the chief executive of the FTSE 100 packaging company DS Smith. Uncertainty over the Conservatives' plans for green power generation was making it more difficult for DS Smith to invest in new facilities in the UK, Chief Executive of DS Smith, Miles Roberts said. Packaging companies are recognized by the government as energy-intensive industries because they require large amounts of heat to reform recycled cardboard into new boxes. "We need to make sure that the UK levels up to the US and Europe," Roberts said, speaking at the company's new head office in West London. "That is a formidable package of support. We're saying to the UK government, how do we make sure that we don't fall behind?" Reportedly, Miles Roberts' comments came days before British Prime Minister Jeremy Hunt announced the draft spring budget. Bloomberg reported on Saturday night that Hunt would announce a temporary full expensing regime for corporation tax to replace the super deduction. Full expensing will let companies deduct the full cost of certain investments from their taxable profits in the year it was incurred, rather than spread over several years. The Treasury has estimated that it could cost £11 billion a year. Rishi Sunak's government has not so far signaled any intention to subsidize Britain's green industry on a similar scale to the US or EU, although it is thought to be considering some large investments in decarbonisation, such as a request for £500 million to support a battery gigafactory, and £300 million apiece to upgrade the UK's 2 steelworks with blast furnaces. The US is spending $369 billion, £310 billion, on subsidies for green technologies under the Inflation Reduction Act, while the EU has been scrambling to come up with a response after some companies warned that they were considering prioritizing America for investment. Ladies and gentlemen, Germany Finance Minister Christian Lindner said on Sunday he wanted to tackle expenditure in the 2024 budget to fix the country's structural deficit that had resulted from the COVID-19 pandemic and the energy crisis. Lindner said he had informed Chancellor Olaf Scholz on Wednesday that he would not be able to present the cornerstones of the 2024 budget at the upcoming cabinet meeting this week as there was not sufficient agreement on it yet. "We have a massive expenditure problem," he told broadcaster ARD on Sunday. "We must consolidate," he said, adding that higher debt and taxes were not valid options. Lindner, of the pro-business Free Democrats, and Economy Minister Robert Habeck of the Greens last month clashed over plans for next year's budget, according to an exchange of letters seen by Reuters. Reflecting concerns among some Greens that there will be insufficient funds for some of their planned projects, especially as the government is committed to strict debt rules, Habeck took issue with Lindner's proposals. Habeck urged Lindner not to unilaterally prioritize spending in some areas, including on the armed forces and tax reductions for the gastronomy sector, saying his party could not accept the budget plans. Lindner rebuffed Habeck in blunt language. On Sunday, he said the coalition was not blocked but in a difficult situation. His ministry recently said the draft budget should be ready by June despite the growing tensions. Ladies and gentlemen, oil prices ticked up in Monday Asian late morning trade, reversing a weak start as a recovery in Chinese demand and a weaker dollar provided support to a market rattled by the prospect possible further U.S. interest rate increases. After initially slipping, Brent crude futures were up 19 cents, or 0.23%, to $82.97 per barrel by 04:10 GMT. West Texas Intermediate crude futures, WTI, ticked up by 20 cents, or 0.26%, to $76.88 a barrel. Market sentiment was fragile as worries about further monetary tightening by the Fed have been exacerbated by high crude oil inventories in the U.S., analysts from ANZ Bank observed in a note on Monday morning. Even so, positive information from the Chinese market is playing a supportive role. If you considered China opening up and a pickup in jet fuels and very limited spare capacity, we are talking 2 million barrels, so as I said we are cautiously optimistic in the short to midterm and the market will remain tightly balanced, Saudi Aramco CEO Amin Nasser said. The failure of Silicon Valley Bank and New York-based Signature Bank and concerns about possible contagion led to a sell-off in U.S. assets at the end of last week, which has also put downward pressure on the dollar. A weaker greenback makes oil cheaper for holders of other currencies, lending support to oil prices. Oil's fluctuating start to the week follows positive momentum on Friday, when U.S. employment data surprised to the upside. Data for February beat expectations, with non-farm payrolls rising by 311,000, compared with expectations of 205,000 jobs added, according to a Reuters survey. The New Zealand government is boosting financial support for around 1.4 million citizens as it tries to offset three-decade-high inflation ahead of the country's election later this year. Inflation is running at a near three-decade high of 7.2% and is increasingly becoming the key political issue ahead of the election in October, which polls indicate will be tightly contested. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins said in a statement the government would boost benefits for pensioners, students, children and parents from next month. The package of bread and butter support we are announcing today will help people who are really feeling the bite from the rise in the cost of living, said Hipkins. Since taking over the leadership, Hipkins has said he is focused on basic issues, such as the cost of living crisis, and has shelved a number of projects, such as the merger of state-owned radio and television stations. He added on Monday that a number of other projects were also being cut to help pay for benefit increases, including a longer timetable for planned upgrades to public transport. "I want New Zealanders to know the government is doing its bit and is cutting its cloth to suit the times we are in," Hipkins said. Japan has ceased the mandatory mask-wearing requirements, after more than 3 years of tightening epidemic prevention measures since March 13. Disney park operator Oriental Land Co., 4661. East Japan Railway Co., 9020. And cinema operator Toho Co., 9602. Are among the major companies allowing patrons to go maskless starting Monday, based on revised government guidance announced last month. But a rapid behavioral change is unlikely, given a long history of mask usage in Japan and a pollen onslaught that has given hay fever sufferers one of the worst spring seasons in years. "Mask-wearing was part of our culture even before COVID-19, said Hitoshi Ashitani, a Tohoku University professor who was an architect of Japan's COVID response. "I think many people will be wearing masks even after the rules are relaxed. Regarding masks, I think it is safer to wear one when riding public transportation to guard against contagion," Yutaka Izawa, 60, said as he walked around the Ginza shopping district in Tokyo. South Korea dialed back most requirements on indoor masking in January, while Singapore allowed bare faces on public transport last month. The United States and England halted most mask mandates early last year. 22 people died when a boat carrying them off Madagascar capsized while they attempted to sail to the French island of Mayotte, Madagascar's port authority said on Sunday. The boat, which was carrying 47 people, capsized on Saturday in the seas off Nkazambarona in the north of Madagascar, the Maritime and River Port Agency said in a statement. The agency said the boat had suffered an accident, after which 23 of those on board were saved, while 22 bodies had been found. The other 2 were unaccounted for. A police officer who did not wish to be named said most of those who had been rescued had fled to avoid being apprehended for attempting to travel to Mayotte. UDOT's officials stopped hundreds of mostly Venezuelan migrants entering the country from Mexico on Sunday, March 12, after a large group broke through Mexican lines to demand asylum in the U.S., only to be thwarted by barbed wire, barriers and shields. Frustrated with problems securing appointments to seek asylum using a new UDOT's government app, the migrants gathered at the frontier in the Mexican border city of Ciudad Juarez, but could not breach the crossing connecting the two countries. Many of the migrants had small children with them. At one point, some migrants attempted to hurl an orange, plastic barrier at the UDOT's line. Some people said pepper spray was deployed to repel them. "We just want to get in to have a future and help our families," said Camila Cruz, an 18-year-old Venezuelan, sobbing heavily. Neither UDOT's Customs and Border Protection, CBP, nor the Mexican government's National Migration Authority immediately replied to requests for comment. After some pushing and shoving with the officials, the crowd of migrants eventually withdrew, with some heading down to the banks of the Rio Grande where they were monitored by U.S. immigration officials arrayed on the other side. Many migrants have become fed up with the asylum process since the Biden administration made an app called CBP One available to them that was meant to streamline applications. They say the app is beset by persistent glitches and high demand, leaving them in limbo in perilous border regions. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security has said recent app updates will simplify and speed up the process. Australian police officers rescued a kangaroo joey from floodwaters on Sunday, March 12, as a record-breaking flood in Australia's Queensland state peaked. 2 large crocodiles were also spotted near the joey, Queensland police said. The flood, triggered by heavy rain over the past week, was worst in the remote Gulf of Carpentaria town of Bucktown, about 2,100 kilometers (1,300 miles) northwest of state capital Brisbane. Dan McKinley, chief executive of the local council responsible for Bucktown, said on Sunday that 97 residents had been airlifted out in the past 48 hours. The crisis comes after frequent flooding in Australia's east over the last 2 years due to a multi-year La Niña weather event, including once-in-a-century floods that hit remote areas in the neighbouring Northern Territory in January. On March 12, thousands of people gathered in Bhopal City, the capital of Madhya Pradesh state, central India and Ujjain city, to enjoy the Hindu festival of Rang Panchami. Rang Panchami is also a festival to welcome spring, similar to Holi festival. Participants will have fun, dance and sprinkle or swim colors in a vibrant and passionate atmosphere. This is a long-standing event in Bhopal, becoming an occasion for communities in the area to have fun with each other, with colors, water and balloons, said a local resident. Meanwhile in Ujjain, on this day, people will hold a special prayer at Sri Mahakaleshwar temple and colorful offerings will be made to the god of destruction Shiva. Rang Panchami, where Rang means color and Panchami means the 5th day of the 3rd week of Phalgun month in Hindi calendar. The festival is held 5 days after the Holi Color Festival. People across the Gulf held celebrations to mark the Hindu festival of Holi on Friday, March 10, and Saturday, March 11. The Holi celebrations come after a 2-year pandemic lull. In Bahrain, devotees gathered at the 200-year-old Hindu temple in Downton Manama to celebrate Holi, with Lok Sabha Speaker O.M. Birla attending and greeting people. It is good that people now, they are living their normal life, said Muhammad Elias, a Bahraini citizen covered in paint just outside the temple. In Dubai, hundreds attended an event called Color Beach Party 2023 to dance and smear colors on each other. This festival that we are trying to put together is to ensure that we celebrate diversity, we celebrate color, and Dubai is a city that has so much diversity and that is something that we want to celebrate as well here, said Sanjeet George, the events manager. Celebrated at the onset of spring, Holi holds a mythological importance, that of the triumph of good over evil. It is also associated with the eternal love of the Hindu Lord Krishna and Radha and a riot of colors. Also known as the Festival of Colors, Festival of Spring, and Festival of Love, Holi is celebrated by millions of Hindus across India and around the world.